Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Glad you're here. Glad you're here. And it's good to see your face.
Okay.
So,
Thank
everybody,
you.
welcome. I'm going to get started. And I'm actually going to get off to a start in which I'm letting people enter the room and enter the Zoom because people will keep showing up as we keep moving forward. But I'm just going to jump in. And I'd love to jump in by first welcoming everybody here and also um, seeing if anybody feels like sharing a few words about why you're here in the specific sense in this Zoom talk about what is archetypal astrology, but in the larger sense, what called you to the language of the stars, to this very kind of outlier practice that really tends to sometimes hypnotize people or somehow really enchant them like it did for me. So if anybody feels like sharing, I'd love to hear as we're letting people into the room here, into the Zoom, into the Zoom room,
I'll
into the
say
room Zoom.
something. Just remember loving your take on astrology and how it synthesizes. So
Yes, beautiful. Well, let's get to synthesizing. Excellent. So, um, what is archetypal astrology? That's what we're here to talk about today. What is archetypal astrology? What's the history? What's the practice? What is the focus? What is the results? Um, how is it different from other forms of astrology? Um, why did it develop? And so we're going to get into all that. Before we do, though, I got a little message here. Um, all right, cool. Safi is in a laundromat, but she had to just come in anyways because she's been fascinated with the stars since she was a little kid. All right. So thank you, Shafi. So Safi. All right. One thing I'm just going to add here before we get started is that I am teaching a course. If what you hear excites your fascination and you feel fire gets ignited inside you, I'm going to be teaching a course called The Fundamentals of Archetypal Astrology as a Spiritual Practice. And that is a chance for you to start your own practice so that you can be your own practitioner of archetypal astrology. You can kind of, after that, you can kind of head off on your own, read your own birth chart as the map to your own path of psychospiritual growth, learn how to, know how to read the charts for others by just looking at it. And also the transits, which is the timing of life, the rhythm, the orchestration of life, and how to dance with that, how to understand that, and how to um, make one's life a kind of a piece of artwork. That's I if you've ever sometimes I think about what it was like before Google Maps, because I use Google Maps all the time, and I grew up, I was born in the 1970s, so I was around when there were real maps, but I never use a real map anymore. Um, and I wonder, I try to remember back, like what was it like before Google Maps? And it's tough to remember back. And I now using my transits, it's hard for me to remember back before I knew what transits were, like how I plan things. I plan this talk, how I plan the events in my life. Now everything has a beat to it. It's almost like surfing, when you see surfers on a wave, there's kind of like this sense of rhythm, natural rhythm. There's a natural substrata of which we are part, and it has a rhythm, a rhythmic motion. And surfers just use that power of nature to get behind them and carve and do what they do. And they don't have to drum it up with their own willpower. They don't have to make the wave come up. They just get to dance on it. And so that's what the practice of transit analysis is, watching the movements of the planets and how they reflect the cycles in our life and the rhythms and the kind of unfolding manifestation of our life. And we get to anticipate it. We get to see the wave that's coming. Surfers, they go out and they wait for a set, and they see the wave before it's coming. They prepare, they paddle, they get their motion going, and then they hit the wave and they ride, and they are able to um, anticipate the shape, the speed in such a way that when it comes there, they just unify with it. And that's the exact same for transit analysis. You see what's coming, you know the pace, the tone, and you're ready for it. And you also know how long things last. So the fundamentals of archetypal astrology as a spiritual practice is a course I have coming up. Everybody who's registered for this talk is going to receive an email with a recording of this talk. And hello, Mary. And you're also going to receive um, you're going to receive, let me just pin my video here. So you're going to receive also the link to the course, and it's also in the chat. And if you're watching this as a recording, you're going to also have the link for the course nearby. Okay, everybody. So what is archetypal astrology? So archetypal astrology is a practice that is a tradition within the larger umbrella of archetypal astrology. So, of astrology. So astrology has been around for a long time, for recorded history, all of recorded history, and probably before recorded history, in the sense that, in Mesopotamia, there's very distinct use of archetypal, of astrology, excuse me. And in cave paintings that date way before that, there's a lot of celestial events and phenomenon depicted. So it may very well be a part of human culture as long as there's been human culture, who knows. Such a length of time allows for things to grow. Like a tree can really grow if it's allowed the time span. It can grow quite big, have a thick trunk. So the tradition of astrology, the larger family trunk of astrology, is thick, and there's so many branches coming off of it over so many thousands of years. Mesopotamia, they practiced it one way. Ancient Greece, they practiced another way. Ancient India, there's so many different, there's Mayan astrology, there's Chinese astrology, which is a little bit different in terms of looking at the movement of the planets, but nevertheless, there's so many different traditions of astrology, and they all have their own strengths and their own kind of component parts. Almost like in a garden, you have each of the plants has like a different fragrance to it, and they all together make the garden. And so with all the sense of vibrancy of life, life likes to diversify. And so when we walk into the garden, we get to smell all the different flavors. We get to feel that vibrancy of life just kind of coming into bloom. And those are all the different traditions of astrology. Astrology has just been such a part of human culture for so long, and such a main central part for many cultures in the history of humanity. And so imagine you're in that garden and you go to a specific flower. You want to focus on a specific flower and really relish a specific scent, and how that, when we're in the garden, we smell everything. We saw all the verdant color, and that's one thing. And then when we get to appreciate each one, smell the specific scent of each one, we get to just relish in that and enjoy the beauty of that. And the unique creation, that is unique creation. And archetypal astrology is one of those scents, a scent that came about with using astrology specifically for the focus of understanding the psycho-spiritual growth path of an individual. So there's less of a focus on predicting what is going to happen outside in one's life. There is some capacity in that way, but the focus is less. The focus is on understanding what's happening inside with a new perspective, a perspective that goes beyond psychological understanding of, like, I am a body, and inside that body is my mind, my heart, my chemistry, and the life that takes place that's mine is inside here. Everything outside is not my life necessarily. It's external to me. And so psychological growth, physical growth, psychological phenomenon, physical phenomenon is limited to the framework of my body and my biography, my memories that I contain therein. And so archetypal astrology is understanding the psycho-spiritual growth of an individual as story of their life. So the story of your life is who were your parents? Who were the people that you met along the way? Who were the what were the events that shaped you? And so when we look at through the lens of archetypal astrology, when we look at a birth chart, we see the whole storyline of the life. We see the kind of the challenges we've been through, the meaning that is lies underneath the challenges, the meaning that sometimes, whether we even want to or not, we draw meaning from it. And we tend to, because of our challenges, we are, it's as if our psyches, our inner orientation mechanism is trying to wrestle with that, trying to make meaning out of it so that we can gain some type of strength from it and move forward. And that's in the chart. That's what we look at in the chart, in the astrological birth chart and archetypal astrology. And why would a form of astrology focus specifically on the psychospiritual growth of an individual? And how would that come about? You know, what's with that? So archetypal astrology actually developed out of the clinical research into psychedelic therapy, the therapeutic use of psychedelics. So there seems to have been a trend in astrology in the past 100 years. We could probably trace it back further than that, but of moving away from predictive or moving away from an exclusivity around predictive astrology. So using astrology just exclusively to predict what's going to happen outside, or what's going to happen in one's life, when one will get married, when one will get a job, when one will have a nice event happen, when one will have a bad event happen. And so there is a kind of a movement away just exclusively focusing on that, and a bit more of using astrology as a light into the individual. It kind of almost like gets paired with the development of psychology in human culture, and Freud and Jung, and in the sense that there began to be a focus on the individual. It's also paired with the worldview developing in such a way that there was the Enlightenment, there was the scientific revolution, and there was a freeing of the human being from the thrall of our environment, because of a kind of a Promethean discovering inside ourselves, a Promethean capability to master our environment through science, through study, through the logical mind, the rational mind. And with that freedom from being at the behest of our external world and kind of having more dominion over the external world, came a liberation. There came a liberation, but at the same time, there became a kind of a cultural estrangement, because there was a sense that the more and more we mastered the external world, the more and more we could see that the external world looks like a mechanism. It looks like a machine. It looks like a substrate of molecules that are banging together according to scientific law, and it's very mechanical. And so there's a sense that the meaning that we give to life, it got more closer and closer and closer into us, until it was just limited to our psychology, and really just limited to the brain that's in our body, because there's a sense that the world is really mechanistic. The world is really, just made of molecules, and consciousness just happened to come out of the way those molecules interacted, formed life, and then consciousness. And so similarly, as their kind of scientific paradigm began to move from a freedom quality, being free from the natural world, from the external world, or being more free, having more dominion over it, an estrangement happened, in a sense of kind of being divorced from the natural world and the meaning therein, that there's a kind of an enchanted world that carries meaning to it, that it begins to look like, well, actually the meaning is just projected. We are biological just mechanisms that create meanings in our own head, and that's projected outwards. And so as the scientific paradigm developed, psychology developed, and began to kind of tighten the lens upon the human being, that, okay, what's meaning is really in our mind. Meaning is really, like if we think of gods and goddesses and religion and spirituality, Freud talked about this in the future of an illusion. There's really just what's in our own mind projected outwards. If thunder is something that, like, in a ancient culture was seen as the divine kind of rumbles, actually that's just a projection. That's just a projection of what's inside us, what's inside our own mind. So psychology was tightening the lens down and seeing um, everything as kind of just centered on the individual, really centered on the individual psychology and individual mind, and then a lot of other different scientific disciplines and neuroscience and all these different type of explorations, trying to figure out what is consciousness. It looks like it's limited to, looks like it's just a function of molecules, and meaning is just a function of what we project outwards from inside us. And so astrology started to kind of take up the task of understanding the individual. It's almost as if, okay, if we have an intuitive sense that the universe is enchanted and meaning is intrinsic, but we're being told that the universe is mechanistic and there's no meaning, then where does that search go? And a lot of it, kind of that impulse got funneled into psychology. And then similarly with astrology, is kind of like this rumbling and this urge to try and find meaning. And that time the focus was on the individual. We're going to grab the individual, we're going to look into the individual, look into their mind, look into their psyche, and find where that meaning is. We're going to shake it out. And same with astrology, became more psychological, more showing of this psychological disposition of the individual. And that psychological field and its investigations of trying to understand the individual psyche ran into a reawakening of a kind of practice that existed in most ancient cultures, and definitely in ancient cultures in the West, in ancient Greece and the Eleusinian mysteries, which is the imbibing of medicine, psychedelic medicine that alters one's consciousness and allows one to experience an inner realm that is as vast as the outer realm. So it's kind of like a sense of that the individual is not limited to just kind of a biological organism. And so the research into it was kicked off really by LSD. That was the main discovery. They found a chemical that was so potent, it really surprised them that it could alter the human mind in such minute doses that the field of chemistry really wanted to understand this, and also psychology. And so they started, Sandoz Pharmaceuticals started sending out ampules to psychologists, psychiatrists, to understand this. And that really started the consciousness exploration that was the 1950s, 1960s. And so my teachers, Dr. Stanislav Grof and Richard Tarnas, they were researchers in psychedelic therapy, therapeutic use of LSD and other psychedelics. And they were looking for a tool that could help them anticipate the type of material that would come up in a session, because the opening, it's almost as if, like, imagine that we're standing upon the world and we look up into the sky and we see the starry night, and then we feel the world is eternal, the world is this limited ground that we stand on, and the starry night is above. But then someone comes and with a saw and they cut a hole in the world below us, and they take that hole out, and we see what's under us too, and we realize, whoa, infinite space, infinite stars below us too. So that's kind of a metaphor for the LSD experience, the psychedelic experience, was a sense that the individual, the door opened within the psyche of an individual to just as vast a terrain as we see with the senses outwards. And that in that vast terrain, what would come up, the material that would come up, was very hard to anticipate, if not impossible to anticipate. Within the same person on 3 different occasions, or within 3 people on the same occasion, all the experiences would be different. There's no way that they could anticipate it, but they wanted to anticipate it because the psychological, psychospiritual material that would come up was so strong. that it was helpful for them to feel prepared. And so they're looking for diagnostic tools, all types of psychological tools, Rorschach and various tools. And they looked at the entire toolkit of the psychological field and nothing worked. Someone suggested astrology. They were hesitant, but they thought, what do we have to lose? So they used they investigated. They found that was the tool that could help them understand the sky within, that could help them understand what material would come up with what charge, what coloring, what themes, not necessarily exactly what will come up, but just what's the tone, what's the theme, what's the coloring, what's the hues, um, and also help them kind of put it together with the larger life arc themes, and help them just gain some perspective. And so that is the opening of the sense that there's a sky without, but there's a sky within, and the two reflect each other. The astrological birth chart is a picture of the sky without when we were born, but yet what it reflects is the terrain within us. And so this is the history of archetypal astrology and how it came about. There's the researchers, Richard Tarnas and Dr. Stanislav Grof. They discovered that this is the use of this tool. They didn't even, I don't believe, have the name for it in the very beginning. They just thought astrology can be used in this way, and that was they weren't interested in predictive astrology so much. They weren't interested in any number of the ways that you can use astrology. They were interested in the psycho-spiritual growth of the individual. And so that's what they focused on. And that's the cornerstone of archetypal astrology. And that's kind of how it's a bit different from other forms of astrology, which other forms of astrology can be used also to gauge, understand, get the rhythm, pace, insight into the psycho-spiritual growth of the individual. It's not limited, it's not exclusive, hopefully not, to archetypal astrology, but that's the genesis of archetypal astrology. That's the real genesis. And so they were, since that was their fundamental concern, how to map the growth of the psycho-spiritual growth of the individual, they looked at, well, what components of the birth chart are the most helpful in that way? And this is the practice of archetypal astrology. Now, how is the practice of archetypal astrology different from other forms of astrology? They found that it's the planets. The position of the celestial bodies was the most important. If they didn't have time they had to cut to the chase. They had to cut to the chase and get to the real hard kernel of insight there. And the planets were those hard kernels in the sky. In astrology, if you're new to astrology, there's a lot of different things that you can look at in the birth chart. You can look at what's called the house system, which is a division of space according to where the eastern horizon is at any point in time, the degree of the zodiac where the eastern horizon is. There's also the zodiac system, which is a way of dividing the plane of the ecliptic of the solar system. And so there's lots of different ways to divide up space, lots of different symbolisms there, lots of different components that can be combined in different ways that create the different traditions of astrology. All of them, though, agree that when a planet's in a degree in the sky, that's where it is. It's observable, it's there, it's a hard body. And all of them more or less agree on the symbolism of the planets. So that is consistent across most traditions of astrology, and that is actually the focus of archetypal astrology. I'm an archetypal astrologer. In my practice, I also use houses and signs, but I don't use them primarily. I always look at the planets, and when I look at a birth chart, I look first and foremost at the planets and their alignments to each other, which are called aspects. Their alignments to each other. And that really creates a portrait. It actually creates a portrait. It's a different way of looking at an individual. If we look at an individual surface, we can see their face and everything, but that's we can't see that deep into them. We can just see the surface level. We can ask them to go and look in their mouth, and that's about as deep as we can go. But there's a way that the portrait of the birth chart is actually a way to look into the individual and to see a portrait of their life. Again, just like we talked about in the beginning, it's the story of their life, the people they've met, the places they've gone, the situations they've encountered, the story of the life. And in that way, it's a beautiful practice. It's a beautiful practice to be able to see that the stars in the sky, the positions of the stars in the sky, reflect a play that's happening on this stage of the earth, all the events and the people that are coming in and out of our lives, and the meaning that we carry inside. So, three levels of experience: inside, external surface of the world, and the sky, all three reflecting each other. And so there's a sense in archetypal astrology that the planets are not exerting power over us. They are not tied up to events that happen in our life or moods or experiences that we have, because that they're exerting some type of influence or force or interjecting themselves into our life. It's merely a reflective quality, just like we talked about. The meaning that we give, the events that happen outside and the sky above, they're all reflective of each other. Three levels, all reflecting each other. And archetypal astrology has within it a tendency to, or I guess you could say a potential to open up a terrain in front of the individual of spiritual noteworthiness, in the sense that if we start seeing life in the way that the sky, events that happen around us, and our internal feelings about those events are all interlinked, it's a very different perspective than the one that I started talking about today. The sense that our life is just limited to the biological frame and the biographical story, the biographical kind of timeline and the biological frame of our body, and everything outside is just kind of randomly happening, governed by scientific laws, but it doesn't have any inherent meaning. The meaning is projected out onto it. And so it's a very different perspective, because then there's a sense that, okay, well, there's an inherent harmony. Everything is kind of moving in step. There's an inherent connectivity between my internal terrain, the play unfolding outside of me, and the movements of the heavens, the grandeur of the heavens. There's a sort of like this sense that I'm looking at the same coin from different angles, or I'm looking at the same prism or something, or the same light just refracted in different ways. So there is an inherent tendency of archetypal astrology, and maybe any form of astrology, if we dive deep enough, to begin to open up one's experience to a paradigm in which the people that we meet outside of us, rather than them just being a part of random events kind of bouncing off each other, the people that we meet, the stars that are reflected, like say we have an event and we meet some people, and then there's at a certain time there's this alignment happening. The archetypes, which are planetary archetypes, we refer to them as each planet has an archetype. That's where the archetype comes in archetypal astrology. And that's, we talked about the focus on the planets. So each archetype, like Venus, the archetype of Venus, the archetype of love, for instance, right now we have Mars-Venus conjunction, Venus-Mars conjunction in the sky. So Venus, the archetype that's associated with love, harmony, pleasure. And then Mars, the archetype that's associated with forceful action, drive, vitalization, forcefulness, and can be aggressive or assertive energy. And so when those two are together, the people that we meet at that time, the events around us that reflect that energy, they are their own people. The events are their own events, but they're also vehicles through which these archetypal energies get illustrated. It's almost like colors. You see an illustrator on if somebody's using Illustrator online, you're watching them color. The colors are the basic three colors, just used in different, and from them we get characters that come to life. And so we get to have an appreciation for, these individuals are their own individuals. They're their own individuals, but they're also something more. They at their base are something divine. They are a reflection of the divine archetypes. And my experience of them is actually, and my emotions, when I look at that same Venus Mars conjunction, I will look at where it lands in my chart. I can see that the meaning that I'm giving to observing them is also a reflection of the archetypes. So, in a way, I'm also a vehicle for the archetypes to manifest. And the stars are a vehicle for the archetypes to manifest because the planets are also carrying the same symbolism. They're in a conjunction, they're together, they have the same symbolism. And so there's a sense that they are also kind of a reflection. And so then what is really the archetypal, where does it land? Where's the hard core? Where's the permanent resting place or kind of home of these archetypes? If the planets are really just reflecting them, the events are reflecting them, my own inner experiences, my life is reflecting them. And then the sense that we get that is that there is a consciousness that underlies our being. And that is, everything is happening within that. Within that, everything can change, everything can, you know, morph into, everything is always changing and changing into other stuff, but that awareness is always there. And so we get a sense that the archetypes are, that consciousness itself is the kind of substrate, and the archetypes, it's almost like the illustrator, I guess you could say, and the archetypes are the color, and then the two get together and they can create anything. You know, they can create anything, any manifestation of events. And the with that perspective, we can go down some very beautiful roots of exploration, in the sense that if there's a kind of a conscious, if there's like this kind of consciousness at the fundament of everything, and then there's these archetypes of which everything is manifested, the kind of building blocks or colors from which everything is manifested, then when we meet other people, we're meeting ourselves. You know, we're meeting the same quality, the same substrate is there. You know, we meet events, we meet people, we meet animals, we meet plants, we meet anything. There's a sense that beneath it all is the same thing, a reflection of our own life, of our own light, as David says. And so this is going a bit afield of archetypal astrology as a tradition itself, because this is my inflection of it. This is where this is the path that I travel on, and I'm basically giving you I'm giving you a kind of a report of the scenery as I see it. And that can be a beautiful exploration, in the sense that, you know, if we go back and we look at ancient texts, spiritual texts, even more recent ones, but, you know, any tradition that has at its base a real kind of spiritual revelation, you know, whether we're talking about Jesus Christ or the Buddha or whoever it is, there tends to be this kind of chorus of similar things said over and over again, that heaven, freedom from suffering, it kind of the peace, the bliss, in the sense that and the ability to move beyond loss in life. Like, for instance, if I lose somebody, we all lose people. You know, somebody dies and they're lost. And then there's this kind of imagery that we get in some kind of iconography in religion of like being reunited after death in heaven, and everybody's there, you know, and it's like they're, you know, seeing each other again. You know, another way that we could look at it is if we're talking about the same substrata is there within, you know, the individual, myself, yourself, then, you know, if the kind of the guises of the dance, if we lose that when we die, the return is to the same identity. That's all the identities that has within it, you know, that's like has within it the same person that we lost before, has within it us, has within it everything. And so again, I'm going a little bit afield. This is more of my own investigations, but this is the type of path that we can set down on. We can kind of, set off on these sort of investigations when we start examining the archetypes. And another thing we can do is we can actually celebrate. We can make life a celebration of the divine that's in everything. Even just looking at the news, or looking at, we could look at artists, performances. There's a sense that, wow, this person's talented. We get to enjoy what they've created. But, if we look at their birth chart and we look at, what archetypes they're born with, and we look at how they are manifesting through this person, we can also just see this is the universe creating, whatever you want to say, the creative principle. This is both that individual's hard work, but it's also the universe showing us its colors. And those colors are the building blocks of all reality. So, the same thing when we go to the grocery store, same thing when we watch the news, it's all there. And we can recognize it, we can track it, we can say, oh, there's this archetype, there's Mercury, there's Pluto, there's Neptune, there's Uranus, there's, we can see, wow, isn't it amazing, the creativity and intelligence of life to be able to manifest all these different ways. Like that, it's just like we get to see, like, oh, look at that, I never would have thought of that. That is life with a new inflection on, Uranus, Neptune, with a new inflection on Saturn, Uranus, Saturn, Mars, Saturn, Sun, Venus, Uranus, whatever it is. And so yeah, so those are the kind of sublime layers. There's practical layers in the practice of archetypal astrology, in the sense that if we are going through a challenging time, we can get a sense of the timeline there. Some things feel like they're going to last forever, and we could be really suffering. But when we have a sense of, oh, you know what, it's really these 3 months. 3 months, that's a long time, but these 3 months are really the heart of it. And plus, we know the archetypes involved, so we know that kind of the lessons involved. We know a bit where it's going. And then not only that, beforehand, we can anticipate it. We can know, like, for instance, me this summer, I've been probably looking at this summer for over a year, and I knew it would be a challenging time. And I knew the inflections would be to the moon, which has to do with the family and the home. And we've experienced loss in our family. And I know that it's kind of, we're going into it, even it's, the challenge is not yet over. And so I knew that, I knew that going into it. I didn't know exactly how it was going to happen, when it was going to happen, who we're going to lose, but I did have a sense. And I even reached out beforehand. There's an archetypal astrology and transpersonal psychology page on Facebook. And I put a post there and I said, if you're having a transit of Saturn to the natal moon in such and such way, at such and such time period, like, what would you do to prepare? And I got wonderful feedback. And so there's a sense that we can kind of anticipate. And so when things show up, even the things that really can feel like they shatter us, we can still feel the sense of marveling, of that, like that it's like I'm going into an encounter with the divine. It's not going to be an easy encounter, but it's an encounter with the divine nonetheless, in all its various forms. And so there's that practice. There's the I'm just gonna peek at my notes here. There's practical practices in terms of just planning any event in life. Even just small things is great to. It's great to know timing. It's great to know pace. Great to know the archetypes involved. It's great to help me at least relax, because if it's a great situation or even a challenging situation, if I don't know how it's going to pan out, I don't know where life is leading me in this chapter. If I know the archetypes, I know how they tend to interact, and I know the lessons will be of a general certain form. So I know to look out for that. And when I look out for that, I pick up on it earlier, and I start to integrate the lessons earlier. And the universe likes that. Actually, it responds well to that. as opposed to resisting. I don't know if you've ever experienced this in your life, where something's coming up and we're just resisting. We don't want to go there, you know? And then the universe is just like, oh, you're going to resist. Um, and so there's a sense like, hey, look, universe, I know you got me. It's not easy, but I know that there is an endpoint. There is somewhere that it's kind of trying to bring together a new synthesis that's going to make sense when I get there. I just know the characters that are involved now, and I know that it's generally going to be kind of like this. And when the specifics will show themselves when they're ready. And so that's another practical application there. And then obviously with the work with psychedelics, is just a beautiful understanding of, because in the work with psychedelics, we can have very direct encounters with the archetypes, because what different psychedelic medicines can do, they all, different categories act differently, but generally speaking, the the they tend to turn down the volume on the part of the mind that is evolved for our survival and keeps track of logistical characteristics of reality that have to do with time, space. Like, we'll keep a measure of space, keep a measure of time. I roughly know how long a half an hour is. I know how far a mile is roughly. Um, and I know what my day is scheduled like. I know like what sections are for what parts and things like that. Very useful part of the mind, but it's a part of the mind that keeps the top on the boiler, the kind of pressure cooker of our life, because we can't have traumatic experiences or deep psycho-spiritual material that needs to kind of get catharted up, vomited out, metaphorically or physically. That can interrupt our survival. So our survival mind kind of wants to keep things cool. So it keeps that top on the pressure cooker, and then the pressure cooker blows when we just can't keep it anymore. And then we have these kind of breakdowns of behavior that is just like, like, whoa, what did I do just there? I totally lost, like, that's not me. That's not what I think of myself, but somehow I couldn't control my behavior. And so what the work with psychedelics does is it kind of eases, if you've ever worked with pressure cookers, it kind of like takes some pressure off and then takes the top off and kind of allows you to stir and bring the kind of sediment up from the bottom and get it rearranged in a better way, so that the everything is the vent valve. So there's part of that is a coming up of material that's really strong, can potentially be strong. Sometimes it can be strong in a very pleasant way, just like ecstasy. Sometimes it can be strong in a really unpleasant way, like hell, torture. But it's never meant to get stuck in our craw and just stay there. The pleasure is meant to be appreciated, fully experienced, and released. The suffering is meant to be fully experienced and released. And then we're so much lighter because we've released that pressure, we've released that material. And the ways that it can show up is like in raw archetypal form. Because right now, when we look around us, we can look at our transits, we can look at the people that are reflective of those transits. Like, for instance, Venus Mars conjunction. Last weekend, when it was very tight Venus Mars conjunction, I went out. Lots of people enjoying friendships, watching sports. It's very common. Venus, the friendship, the good, feelings, but sports, soccer, fighting, ultimate fighting, this and that. Very Mars, competition, these things. And so I can appreciate that. I can see like, oh, here's the archetypes. Look, here they are. They're engaging. They're showing themselves. They are showing themselves in the sky. They're showing themselves in the world. They're showing themselves in myself. And so I can appreciate them that way. In the psychedelic experience, though, we can just go straight to the archetypal realm and experience them, kind of not have our senses so involved in the sundry elements of the world around us, just raw archetypal experience. We can experience like volcanic transformation as volcanic transformation. Like, we can feel that we're an actual, identify with a volcano that's erupting, the landscape is transforming, or we could, have an experience of deities, like just raw archetypal experiences. And it can show up in any number of ways. But again, when we look at the charts, the transits leading into that, and we know our own birth chart as well, or we're helping somebody else look at that, their birth chart and their transits, if we know the archetypes involved, we have that much little bit more of a sense of ability to surrender. At least I do. And I think others do too. In the sense that, like, whoa, this is powerful experience, this is powerful experience. And I see you. I see, oh, you're Pluto. Like I'm losing myself. I'm a volcano. I'm identifying with the consciousness of a volcano and it's erupting and I'm losing control. This is the internal experience. But then I see like, oh, this volcano, this is Pluto. This is the Pluto archetype happening. And so it gives me a sense like, oh, it's part of the universal orchestration. It's okay. Go with it. Just allow it to happen. And and then again, getting that point of marveling, like, wow, that was the archetype in raw form that I encountered, and I was it. And again, the consciousness that underlies that and allows it to happen. And so these are the practical applications. It's so helpful for helping others, just navigate powerful psychedelic experiences like that, or just their lives. Somebody might be going through a breakup. Somebody might be going through a loss of a loved one, and we know the archetypes involved, and we know where they're going. We don't know exactly where they're going, but we know when these archetypes interact, the lessons tend to be in such and such ways. So we can give them a sense. Oh, this is the beat. This is where you are in the dance of your life. And the next step is going to be somewhere over here. It's going to be somewhat at this pace with this theme. And it helps us to kind of relax into the process of life. And then with looking at the birth chart, our own birth chart, the reflection of our own inner portrait, the birth chart of somebody else, their portrait, their reflection. Sometimes we have behaviors and perspectives and qualities of ourselves that we might not understand, that confuse us, that feel cryptic, that we suffer over. And when we have that reflection, we can see like everything has its place. Everything really has its place. When we understand it, we can place it in the right place. And we can help others shed light and help them place it in the right place. And so there's a sense that, it's almost like, I remember I was watching a video by a singer named Sia, I think it was. And she has this dancer, this girl in the video that is only maybe 11 years old or something like that, who's a fabulous dancer. Just so much energy and just movement. And I was thinking to myself, if that kid was confined to schoolroom for, whatever, 6 hours a day, 7 hours a day, she probably would have been seen as bad, because the energy is just bursting out of this person. Like maybe they're a disruptor, maybe they're somebody that would be receiving a lot of kind of punishment. But if we understand like, oh, this energy has a purpose, it has a place, and we place it in the right arena, then people can shine. People can really shine. And so that's another practical application of archetypal astrology. So I have, examples. We can look at concrete examples. We can talk about concrete examples of both birth charts, individuals, transits, lots of things. I just want to pause because we have been going for a little while now, and I want to check in with everybody. I've been talking now for a while, so I want to just kind of pause, allow everybody to be in this experience here together. Again, it's great to talk about consciousness, but it's another thing to just realize that it's happening right now. It's happening right now. We are together sharing this experience, and at the base of it is your awareness. It's all happening in your awareness. And so let's just kind of acknowledge that, register that. I'm within your field, you're within my field. It's just like the archetypal reflection within, the archetypal reflection without, the archetypal reflection outer space. Which one is the true one? They're all true. They're all reflections. Same with us. I'm in your consciousness, you're in my consciousness. That's the nature of consciousness, is it's not limited to kind of these spatial differentiations. So let's just kind of center ourselves here, be aware. We can just tap into the wonderful process called breathing. It's almost like life equipped us with something to draw us back to our kind of own organic awareness. And so let's be with that now with each other and check in. You can check in with yourself. You have a birth chart, you have a birth story, you have transits um, that are happening right now. I have transits that are happening right now. I have my own birth chart, my own birth life story. And so let's recognize that whatever's happening to you, to in your life, in your field of experience, in the world in which you are couched, or that's couched in your awareness, there are transits happening right now. There are archetypes interacting right now. The play that we've been talking about is actually taking place. So all the components are here for the feeling of the archetype. Sometimes we don't even have to know what they are. We just know that this is the archetypal play happening. Let's just be confident, have faith, and allow ourselves to be right now. And the awareness is always here. That's the fundament of it all. And so with that, checking in with yourself, with what's going on with yourself, I want to just know what's coming up for you. I mean, you can just acknowledge it to yourself, or you can acknowledge it. You can, open up your mic and kind of, we can begin a discussion. But this is, we're transitioning over into exploration time, a discussion time. And we want to do that with a sense that you have something going on. So we want you to settle into what it is that's going on. And if there's something within you that is kind of part of this talk and part of this process right now that wants to be a part of it, like be part of the discussion, let's do it. Let's do it. Let's get a little something going on. I see some movement. Anybody want to turn on their mic and say hi?
Hi,
Safi.
James. It's Safi. How are you?
Oh, good. I pronounced your name correctly.
You did. You got it right. Yes.
Yes. Welcome.
Thanks. I think this is the best explanation of how to use astrology I've ever heard. So thank you very much.
Whoa. Wow.
Yeah, it made complete sense. I've been so interested in it for a long time. Of course, like I said, when I was a kid, I always loved the stars. The thing that always kind of got me stuck was, people's obsession with it, and almost feeling like people forgot that they have free will, that they have, a way of dealing with life, and it's not just only in the stars, but it's also inside. So you said that so beautifully and clearly. And I love that you brought in the psychedelic medicines, because I'm a medicine musician. I really believe in the power of those medicines, and I just love how it all just came together for me in this moment. So thank you very much.
Beautiful.
Yes.
I'm so glad, and also I'm really grateful because you bring in an important part of the discussion. The sense of becoming somehow choosing a kind of a rock of seeming stability or seeming certainty at the cost of our sense of self-empowerment and self-agency. Because, if I get attached to something, it could be a religion, it could be literally anything. I mean, it could be just a habit, I'm really into going to the movies or something, or, it's very common with kind of organized religion. Like, I'm really into this theoretical framework. Same with astrology. I'm really into this kind of way of making sense of reality, which gives me a sense of certainty. And what happens there is that it's at the cost of our sense of agency, our sense that we are an organic being, growing, changing, and we don't know we don't really know how things are going to manifest. Archetypal astrology is almost like we get to, or using astrology in this way is like we almost get to hear a little clip of the music. We don't know how the whole song goes, but at least we know the genre, we know the pace, we know the rhythm. And so it kind of helps us like in that way. At the same time, though, we don't want to feel like that we're giving up the organic shape of twists and turns of life, and we don't know. And like, that's also psychedelic medicine, I think, can help us with that, because it kind of, it'll, if we, sometimes that experience I gave of like the volcano, like I'm suddenly the consciousness of volcano, it can be really scary, but it can also be like a release, because I don't know, like there's a sense of destruction there, but also creation. And what gets destroyed is the sense of, I know what's going to happen next. I know, I know what I know, and I'm so certain of what I'm certain of, as opposed to actually coming into an experience of just releasing and being a part of this field of nature, and not necessarily knowing where it's going, but just releasing back into the bedrock of life. And so that's just such an important.
Yeah, I love that. Yes. Yes. And I think, I didn't grow up with any religion, and I really grew up in nature. My dad was an Eagle Scout, and he took us camping, and he would always say, if you wanted to know God, just look at the sunset. So I just really grew up with that. And so I think I've always kind of shied away from anything organized. And although I always really loved astrology, I shied away because many people, kind of treat it like that. So I think what you just said made a lot of sense, like why I'm really connecting with how you're presenting this is that, it's, we're all just like this part of this bigger organism. And isn't that cool? And so, thank you so much. I'd love to learn more. So I'll keep an eye out for your email. Thank you.
Awesome. Yes. Great. Yes. And I feel the talk wouldn't have been complete actually without you bringing in that point. So double thank you. So feelings we're having, kind of questions, curiosities we've had in our lives, around these explorations around astrology, or even just around life, and anything anybody's experiencing that, maybe you had a transit you want to talk about. If nobody talks, we can look at transits. We can look at, we got a few minutes here, so we can look at stuff. But before we do that, I want to give you a little chance to speak up. Maybe you're doing the dishes and you're just listening. And if so, that's fine too. The archetypes are there in the dishes too. Yes, Miriam.
Um, I'm curious about the archetypes,
Mm-hmm.
and that you mentioned that each planet has an archetype.
Yeah.
And then how does that relate? Because I keep thinking of like archetypes like, tarot or tree of, tree of life archetypes.
Yeah.
Is, is that what you mean? Or are you just saying the,
Yeah. Yeah. So yes, it's a good, there is some defining that can happen between like planetary archetypes versus archetypes that are a little bit more like Jungian, archetypes that are a little bit more like tarot, archetypes that are a little bit more like literary archetypes. So in the planetary archetypes, like, I mean, you could probably tell me more about the tarot than I know. Like, I know the Hierophant, and there's the falling of the towers, there's the Fool, and you could probably speak to this better than I can. Miriam Jacobs, wonderful tarot specialist here with a great book coming out. So Tarot in Motion. So for instance, like the Joker, or no, the Fool, playing music, walking off a cliff or something like that. That's kind of like archetype as manifesting in a little bit further down in the storyline. Because it's a little bit more, it's almost like the way that the paintings are depicted on the tarot. It's a little bit more filled out, and kind of it lands in the human psyche with a little bit more of the backstory filled in. And when we talk about the planetary archetypes, we're backing up and we're going into just it's almost like we talked about colors, using colors to illustrate. The what are the primary? It's like 3 primary colors or something: green and blue and
it's
yellow.
yellow, red, and blue.
Yeah, there you go. So it's like backing up to that point with the planetary archetypes. Like the archetype of Venus is just so kind of backed up to the essential of what Venus is. The archetype of Saturn is so backed up to the essential of what Saturn is. And then through the manifestation of life, it begins to fill out in terms of the storyline, and it begins to fill out and become more complex, like almost like those drawings. It's almost like if you had the raw colors, but then you have a canvas, and you put on those canvas, like if you put on that canvas a specific friend that like the colors get created into a face, that's your friend. It's not an archetype, it's like a real concrete person, right? But if that person is somebody that's kind of happy-go-lucky and like this and like that, and then the colors draw a general character like that, that would be almost like an archetype of, it's not somebody you recognize, but you recognize the trope. You recognize like, oh, this is that general form for which my friend kind of fits in, and so do so many other people. But then if you back up even further, this person's painted mostly with a red palette, in a jester outfit or something like that. You back up even further and you see like, oh, the Mars archetype, oh, the Uranus archetype, like, and so the planetary archetypes are really raw. Saturn, for instance, time. It's the archetype of time. It's the archetype of space, limitation, distance, anything that creates a sense of limitation and separation. And so when we're in the Saturn archetype, just as that, it's just a fundamental base color of archetype. And then once we start coming into creation, it gets like like kind of filtered in through all these, oh, I'm separated from this person because of work that took me on a trip, and we're separated. And I can see how the Saturn archetype is beginning to show up as this time that has an archetypal quality to it. There's a lot of sense of separation, but then this sense of maturing and a kind of a fortifying. Sometimes people will get married, like a classic example might be like Saturn transiting one's natal Venus. So where Venus was in the sky when you're born, Saturn in the sky now is transiting it right before you have a Jupiter transit your natal Venus. So Saturn transits it. We're there with our lover, and then work comes up. We got to go on a trip. We're separated. The work has my schedule packed. I can hardly communicate with that person because of so much work that Saturn is associated with, like burden, responsibility, that which limits us, that which constrains us, the space, the time. Like I'm saying, I'm in a different time zone. Times don't line up. Saturn's showing itself all around, but the general hue is there. Oh, this is like a test. Saturn loves tests for us to graduate to the next level. In fact, the fact that we have tests in school is almost like an external manifestation of an internal quality of within us, of just a tendency to want to get tested to go to the next level. And so there's a sense that, oh, through that challenge of Saturn, which is the separation, the longing, the sense of distance, the isolation, I march through that and I get to the other side, which is Saturn. These archetypes have these archetypes have a spectrum of manifestation, from the challenging side to the rewarding side. So the challenging side is obvious. I start to march towards the rewarding side, and I realize that my love, Venus, is becoming more solidified, mature, certain. That's that Saturn. It's becoming certain. And then as it gets really solidified, the work thing is over, the time distance gap, everything is over. We come back together. But when we come back together, it's almost as if the contract of marriage has already been signed. There's like a sense of commitment. And so we can see how it becomes a very archetypal tale. Like when I was telling that tale, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of you could easily visualize it, because it's almost like an archetype. We don't know the specific character that's in there, but we can probably think of a friend or ourselves in a time like that, because it's an archetypal time. But marching back a few steps is where we get Saturn. And by understanding Saturn in its raw form, we understand kind of the fuller storyline as it can manifest. Miriam, is that helpful? Does that answer your question to some extent? Yeah?
Yeah, it does. That's good. That's wonderful. Okay. Thank you. And I like David's comment too. Thanks, David.
Let me read David's comment here. Okay, so David says, Venus archetype can be seen in the Empress, the Lovers, the Star, the World, etc. Tro archetypes are more defined. Venus archetype is general, bottom line. Great. Okay, so there's a question here actually in the chat section. It says, can you speak to the relationship of the archetypes, astrology, and Groff's BPM stages? You are awesome. I have an outline of my talk, but, obviously passion just drove me through that. And I missed some points, and the points that I miss, you all are filling in. So this is wonderful. So yes, one thing I meant to say is that going back to the discoveries of psychedelic therapy linking to astrology with the work of Dr. Stanislav Grof and Richard Tarnas, something that happened there, it was kind of like a 1-2 punch of realizations. The first of which was Groff's realization of what's called the basic perinatal matrices. And that is that in non-ordinary states of reality, in what he calls holotropic states, which are states that can be induced by psychedelics, spiritual experience, revelation, an altered state, a non-ordinary state, there's a healing intelligence within that wants us to move towards wholeness. That's what holotropic means, moving towards wholeness, holotropic experiences. There's a healing intelligence within that wants us to move us towards wholeness. The ego kind of defense mind that we talked about earlier, that is aware of logistics and our surroundings and keeps us alive, holds that in check to some extent, just like we talked about the metaphor of the pressure cooker. In the psychedelic experience, the healing intelligence is allowed to come more to the fore and begin to bring up the material that is kind of weighing us down, or is really like foreign material at this point. It needs to be catharted out. A lot of birth trauma, a lot of traumas of our past, something he called coex systems, which I won't get into in depth here, but it's like Jung talked about complexes. We have complexes. Why we behave so strange around this and that and this? It's a complex. It's related to what happened to us in teenage years, but also what happened to us in childhood, also what happened to us in the birth canal. And so what he found is that in these psychedelic experiences, people tend to unfold these knots of their complexes, or the coex systems of condensed experience is what he called them. And we might have he gives an example of somebody who had really intense asthma, and then they went into the psychedelic experience, went down a level, and experienced this time when they're were like digging some tunnel with friends as kids, and it collapsed on that person, and they were trapped, hard to breathe, barely survived. It was unprocessed trauma there, and that got processed, which led to going a level deeper, that this same person in their earlier childhood had this experience where their larger brother would beat them up and like choke them and stuff like that. More trauma that came up and got processed. They went into a deeper experience of birth, which was getting the head caught against the pelvis of the mother during the birth canal, and during the birth in the birth canal. And then that experience was brought up and kind of released, which brings us to when we experience birth trauma, that Groff says is the gateway to the transpersonal realm, experiencing experiences that are not limited to our biological body and our biographical life. And he experienced a past life of something, I believe maybe it was getting hanged, or I can't remember exactly what it was in that example. Needless to say, the asthma symptoms went away because the material at the base was kind of processed. And so what he discovered is that in the reliving of birth experience, there's different stages of birth. There's the first stage of birth, the basic perinatal matrix 1, when the baby is in union with the mother. Then there's the second basic perinatal matrix 2, where the contractions happen, but the birth canal is not open, cervix isn't open. So there's a sense of rejection from that union. And then the third is the getting projected through the birth canal and all the constriction that's involved there. And then the fourth is the release and the birth. And so what I just described is the archetype, almost like a tarot archetype, the storyline archetype of anything that gets created. We grow until we reach a level where we can't grow anymore, and we got to go through a test. We get kind of locked out of that level. We got to go through a test. We got to pass through a gauntlet into the next level and experience freedom on that level. And so that's an archetype. And so that birth is also an archetype. It's an archetypal story. Each one of us has our own specific inflection of that archetypal story. And within that archetypal story, if we again back up to the basic colors, we get in the first basic perinatal matrix, Neptune, the archetype of Neptune, the archetype of the undistinguished union. That's the archetype of Neptune. The second basic perinatal matrix, the cervix is closed, but there's contractions, and there's a sense of rejection, but there's no way out. Saturn, limitation. The third basic perinatal matrix, the sense of propulsion, but yet constriction. So there's movement, but it's fiery. You're on the precipice of both birth and death. Pluto. And then the fourth basic perinatal matrix, the release into the world, freedom, expansion, Uranus, the archetype of release, freedom. And so those are that was the discovery that they made, is that when people experience these transits, when people experience these in psychedelic sessions, they experience these powerful reliving of their birth, the reliving of the contractions, but no exit, the reliving of going through the birth canal, this fiery wrestling between life and death. You know, depending on which one is really being experienced at that time, we can see reflected in the transits of Neptune, transits of Saturn, transits of Pluto, transits of Uranus. And in that way, what they discovered is that as human society grew and sharpened its tools of exploration of existence, they sharpened our exploration of the external world. And they became, invented telescopes, and we could see further and further out into space beyond Saturn. Saturn's the last planet you can really see with a naked eye. You could, if you're really lucky, you might be able to see Uranus, but mostly you can just see Saturn. But then with telescopes, they're able to see Uranus, they're able to see Neptune, able to see Pluto. And so those reflections of deep solar system, outer solar system, are reflections of deep areas within us that are transpersonal, where the personal, what we can see, the planets that we can see that are very apparent, the personal reality and personal identity is very apparent. But when we get to a depth inside ourselves, we get to a place where the substrate upon which the personal identity is connects us to the larger whole. That's transpersonal. That's how we access transpersonal experience, like the consciousness of a volcano, the consciousness of a whale, the consciousness of a bird, of a super nebula, of a whatever. And so that was the discovery that they made, is that the first discovery, basic perinatal matrix, and then the second discovery is that there's these transpersonal archetypes that are reflected in the perinatal, in the basic perinatal matrices. And so hopefully that answered your question. It was Mary, right? Mary that asked that question. Okay, so we got David here. Hi, Matt. Okay, Matt, I think that's me. I'm James. Hi, I have a question concerning the order of the BPM and the relationship to the planetary archetypes. So David, did I answer your question?
Hi, I understand, sort of just expand upon what you had said about how the planets themselves, in relation to even their order in the solar system from the sun outwards through to Pluto, they represent different levels of consciousness from a transpersonal perspective that we begin to access once we go beyond the realm of Saturn. But then also in a pre-personal sense, there's a perspective that Pluto is kind of that very initial realm that consciousness emerges from. And so it's that battle with our the deepest parts of our natures as animals on an instinctual level. But then once we sort of develop into the realm of Neptune, it's our pre-personal experience of the love and the nurture that we experience within our environment, primarily from our caregivers and our mother. But because we haven't got an egocentric identification with what that entity is, our experience of it is, again, more subconscious and pre-personal. My question is
well said, by the way. I like that about Pluto. And yes, like, yeah, Pluto is associated with the instinctual, the powerful, just like a volcano. You know, if we have drives that kind of volcanically come up and overtake us, there's a sense, that volcanic sense of the instinctual that comes up. And Pluto can be thought to be associated also with the lower, I think the second chakra, which is kind of similar,
Yes.
like an undifferentiated energy that can be perceived almost as like just a well of passionate energy that is not yet differentiated between right and wrong. You know, it's just,
Yeah, it's a
pushed.
basic premise of survival, whether we kill or destroy or be destructive, or whether we fuse with something else and merge with something else to procreate or to create.
Wow.
So that's kind of the underlying sort of thing with Pluto. But my question in regards to that, and I understand it's not so linear because we don't necessarily experience Pluto before we experience Neptune. Like, obviously, in our pre-personal stage of development, there's kind of a mixture of all these things happening at once. But in regards to Pluto and then Neptune and then Uranus and then Saturn, which is when the sort of infrastructures of the egocentric identity start to be formulated, how does that align with the different order that of the planets that we see with the BPMs?
You mean like the physical order of in space, or
Well,
just in terms of?
Yeah, I mean, as it like the physical order that we see, like, as I said, I understand it's also linear, but you know, Pluto, because I sort of also see how Pluto, even though we see that Mars has a dual rulership with Scorpio and with Aries, I kind of see how Pluto also may have a dual rulership with Scorpio and Aries, in a pre-personal sense. So if we put Pluto at Aries and then Taurus at Neptune on a pre-personal sort of level, and then Uranus with Gemini as well, these are sort of like the building blocks of our egocentric personality.
I think you're onto something. I mean, there is a way of looking at it in which the basic archetypal palette just gets kind of repeated on varying levels of resonance vibration. So it's like, for instance, we have in the order of the, what could we call the personal planets, inner planets, we got the sun, moon, obviously. And then we have Mercury, Venus, Mars, like that, right? So, and then we go out, we got, you know, Jupiter, Saturn, and then that's the end of the visible planets. So that's the end of what could be called, you know, there's so many different ways that you can call it: the visible planets, the personal planets, the, you know,
conscious identity.
Everybody's got a different, you know, way of describing it, but basically the sense of the kind of first order. And then after Saturn, when you go further out beyond that, it looks like the symbolism, this is one perspective, I'm not trying to, you know, say anything beyond that, this is just one perspective. It looks like the order can be repeated in the sense that Uranus has a similar resonance to Mercury, in the sense like that Uranus, Mercury before was seen as the trickster and was very kind of had association with the mind and with a kind of like, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of a tone that was kind of metallic. And then when you get to Uranus, there's a similar energy there. You know, it's Uranus associated with like technology, and has a kind of similar bit headiness to it, and there's just similar energy. There's similar vibration. When you go further out into Neptune, it's not unlike Venus in a way. Like Venus, there's a harmonizing quality to Neptune. And then with Pluto, you go further out, it's like a transpersonal version of Mars, just like Neptune's like a transpersonal version of Venus. Uranus like a
or pre-personal as well.
Yeah, and the way you describe it, I like, you know, pre-personal, you know, like that. Yeah, like a less, like going back to the like a little bit closer to the primordial soup.
Well, it's kind of the way I see it is that we start, it's like in regards to consciousness, it's, you know, it's moving where we're all connected, is that it's just this energy that's inherent within the universe, and then it happens to be expressed through individualized forms, i.e. through different people and personalities.
Yeah.
But it fundamentally starts off in the Plutonian realm, and then it moves through to the Neptune, and then all the way to the sun. But then once we've reached that sort of point at the sun, we make our way back outwards. And the transpersonal is a reintegration of those pre-personal aspects of identity, but from a more conscious perspective or point of view. So that in a sense, we're reharnessing those pre-personal, more instinctual, primordial, primitive aspects of ourselves, but from a more consciously integrated, well, hopefully from a more consciously integrated perspective or point of view or aspect of experience.
That's cool, David. Thank you for sharing that. That's great. That's a great frame. You know, it's kind of a frame to put things in and to get a perspective. Yeah.
Oh, well, I've really enjoyed the talk, so that
Yeah,
I'll let you guys continue on.
Thank you for sharing that. That's wonderful. I hope that you shared more. Look forward to encountering that again somewhere.
Thank you. And sorry for calling you Matt.
All good. All good, Joseph. Just kidding. David.
Thanks, man.
Okay, so Mary says, if we don't have a lot of astrology knowledge, but would like to use some of this archetypal astrology to help focus an intention for a journey, what you suggest us to look at in a journeyer? Just as a side note, I'm going to be teaching a course coming up, and it's for absolute beginners or people that have experience with astrology. So if you really want to get deep into an adventure of celebrating the archetypes and kind of integrating that into your own personal practice, there's that option, which I'm going to put here. And I'm also going to email everybody. If we don't have a lot of astrology knowledge, but would like to use some of this archetypal astrology to help focus an intention for a journey, what would you suggest us to look at in a journeyer? So I just want to make clear here, is it our personal journey, or are we helping somebody else plan a journey?
Well, thanks. And can you hear me? I don't
Yes.
know if
Yes, definitely. Great.
Thank you. My camera can't come on, and I'd love to show my face. It's more, I wanted to be able to help a journeyer if I can kind of look at some kind of constellation of who they are. So during the journey, if things come up, I might be able to go, oh, I see that. So I don't know if the rising sign or the, I don't know a lot of the.
Yeah. Well, in archetypal astrology, we're going to look at the planets, and what I'll do is I'll share my screen so you can it's not the screen I want to share. You can, it's again, if you're free, I invite you to my course because we'll get more into it in depth. But if we, let's see whose chart I have here. This is Radhika Apte. Anybody know her? Indian actress. Demi Lovato. So what we would do is, this is just the cliff notes here, but this is AstroTheme. You can pull up astrotheme.com, just a site, like many sites out there, but it color codes what are called the hard aspects and the soft aspects. So this one color codes the alignments that are called hard alignments in red. And so when we look at that, this is that portrait I was talking about. So when an astrologer looks at this, we get a portrait of the life. And we meet the person and we discuss their life. We find out the details. And in the details, we see the archetypes. We see the divine. We see the ways, the creative ways that they've come together in their life, the challenging side, the rewarding side. And we help guide them across from the challenging to the rewarding. And so, for instance, we would see in this chart, like, I'm just choosing something where there's the moon. Most people are familiar with the moon glyph. All these glyphs around the edge are planets, and red lines are red lines. Red lines show the tense alignments. So the moon, that's the moon, square to Saturn. This is the archetype of Saturn. Whatever I've put my cursor on, you can see written here. So we know that a theme in their life is going to be moon Saturn. Okay. One thing you can do is you can go to my website, www.jamesmoran.org/astrology. astro-combo. And you can look up these different combinations. I mean, this is, you know, another way to do it is just to know, like, okay, what's the symbolism of the moon? What's the symbolism of Saturn? We put them together, and we know that in this person's life are the themes of Moon Saturn for the whole life. So we know that that's going to be some part of their journey. So like, for instance, Moon Saturn, where's Moon Saturn? Right here. So I click on it, gives a little description, and then it gives like an example of us, for us to look at of that. But yeah, so that's one thing to look at. And then another thing to look at is the transits of that person. So let's look at Demi Lovato's transits. How do I do this here? All right, add to favorites. Okay, so I go to Astro Theme, and this time I click on this transit and ephemeris chart, and I put in Demi Lovato's birth chart. Where is it? Well, you know, it didn't get added somehow. So anyways, I'm going to put in Elon Musk's birth chart. And we're going to look at what transits he has in case you're planning a transit. He was planning a journey with you. So we can see for Elon Musk, again, we're looking for the red angles. This is, you know, this is a very rough outline of what we do. So we look at, so he's got Jupiter square Saturn, okay, in his transits. So we know that in that journey, there's gonna be somewhere in there the themes of Jupiter square Saturn, Jupiter and Saturn in tension with each other. Jupiter, the archetype of expansion, Saturn, the archetype of constriction. And so we know that there's going to be something in there involving a recalibration around growth and cutting back and restraint. And so within him, there's going to be some type of wrestling with these two to find a way, what can I cut back in order to grow? It's almost like trimming shrubs, you know, like some people trim things because they know if they trim it, it's going to become more effulgent. If that's the right word. It's going to become more full. And so those would be the themes that would come up, and we would discuss it with them beforehand, and we'd say, you know, like find out about their life and find out about where they're at, and then see how where they're at is already reflecting Jupiter, Saturn. And then we'd see like, you know, okay, so we see that this conversation is happening in your life and it's going in this direction. Let's see how it shows up in the journey. And let's welcome it. The inner healing intelligence has a shape that we could never anticipate because the inner healing intelligence is infinitely intelligent. But we do know that it's going to be part of this archetypal story. We know the archetypal characters involved, so we know it's going to kind of involve some conversation between Jupiter and Saturn. You know, it's tough to kind of sometimes narrow these things down into more brief explorations, but how did we do? Did that just confuse you more, or was that helpful?
Thanks, James. I'm still very new to the astrology field. I was hoping there would be kind of like one planet or one, and Chiron was one that I heard in my chart that's where your wound is. So I imagine that would be a good focus, but I wanted to hear if there was like a simple thing to move into.
Yeah, like I would see like what is, and again, the birth chart creates a portrait of your life. So it's like there's wounding, but what's the story? Like what's the wounding? And nothing ever really wants to stay static. It wants to move. Even the archetype of Chiron goes everything from the wounding side to the healing side, and then the healing vibration radiating out. When our own wounds get healed inside, we radiate out that to others, an encouraging energy. That's part of the Chiron archetype too. And there's a story there. There's a story. How did we get from that side to this side? What did we do? How do we grow? And that's in potential in the portrait. So again, you are the storyline unfolding, but the portrait shows, oh, it's going to be about this. It's almost like it's going to be this genre of story. It's going to be, it's almost like, oh, it's going to be a Thomas Hardy story, or like it's going to be a Neil Gaiman story. We don't know which story it's going to be, but the style, the characters, we get a general sense, the genre. I don't know if that's a good metaphor, but yeah. So, but it would come down to knowing more specifics, like what's aspecting Chiron, what's aligning with Chiron right now. What was it like when you were born? What's that portrait? We want to see that portrait. And then we want to see what's the pace, what's the rhythm right now, what's the dance, what's the music, what's happening, and again, marvel at it, like, wow, and then through the journey, just encounter it even more deeply, and then marvel at it some more. I mean, that's really, it's great to learn things. It's great to get the insight. It's great to kind of soften up the impact of our life with these different stages that we encounter, and help us to kind of massage ourselves through the growth and everything like that, and support ourselves. In the end, though, my take is that it's the celebration and the marveling is really where it's at, because then it's kind of like brings it full circle, like, oh, it's just so gorgeous. Mary, hopefully that was helpful. And I really appreciate you getting your mic working and jumping in.
Thank you for what you're offering.
Awesome. I hope to get to meet, cross paths. Maybe we'll be able to get a visual, say hi. Anybody else have any feelings, observations? Alexis, how's the ravioli? When I said, maybe you're washing your dishes and just listening, Alexis said she's making ravioli. Yeah. Anything else? Any? Yeah. Another way, please, David. Anybody, turn.
I was just gonna expand on the question about Chiron. Just I feel like in regards to astrology, so much can be gleaned from just pondering where that planetary body orbits in the solar system and how it orbits. And Chiron goes in between the orbits of Saturn out to Neptune. And it's not a planet, and it has its own sort of peculiar orbit as well. So this body is able to go from our regular, everyday, egocentric realm of consciousness and wander out into the Uranian and Neptunian realms in order to find out what's sitting there and what needs to be healed and what's wounded. And then on its orbit back to Saturn, that healing and that wisdom and that knowledge that is gained through that sort of traversing into the underworld in a lot of ways can become not integrated within the egocentric identity, but also socially within the collective that person is living.
Wow. David, I'm going to look out for your book or your article or your talk, whatever, or not, whatever you feel comfortable doing. It's great stuff you got to share. So just add that to the course of the evolving astrology right now, and I think it'll be a fuller course. I think it'll be a beautiful old song. So thank you very much for sharing. Anyone else have some contributions? I'm going to keep on talking until somebody else talks. Another way that we can use archetypal astrology in general, but archetypal astrology in particular, a way that I use it is looking at what's called world transits. And world transits is a little bit less personal, but it's more like looking at the news, the headlines of the news, the tone, what's happening in the world. World transits is a way of looking at the alignments of the planets as they reflect the world. So it's not inflected through your personal birth chart necessarily, unless you decide to look at that. But you just look at the world transits, you can get a sense of, it really helps make sense of the world. Sometimes things like seem crazy or out of place or left field, or you know, like what the hell's going on? And the divine is what's going on. I mean, what's going on is not, life's not wrong. You know, even human beings with their mad scramble and there's this and there's that, they're not wrong. They're still part of life. As much as we feel estranged and alienated and have trouble, maybe some of us getting back to feeling connected to life, we are life. We are connected to life. We are life. And so our actions are part of the larger whole. And so when we see that, you know, the news isn't crazy. The news is just, I mean, the news is kind of just one perspective, but the events of the world are life. That's the dynamic play. That's the fumbling, grumbling, grappling of consciousness into form, trying to reconcile this archetypal play and these energies in a collective scale. And we see that reflected in the transits. And it's just another way to marvel, you know, another way to marvel at the divine, as far as I'm concerned. And to see, like, beneath it, what's the harmony that's wanting to happen? What's the tail? What's the trajectory beneath the immediacy of the urgency of the moment? What's the trajectory of the tail, of the theme beneath it? What's really wanting to happen? And so in that way, we can also applaud the world news along. You know, if a big transit comes in, it might last 3 years or longer. And it might come in at the beginning. It's rough seas in the world. You know, it's really, things are really struggling. But we can see, we can know the archetypes. We can know that it's going in a direction. And then as we see it begin to take specific manifestation as it moves in that direction, we can applaud it. You know, we can feel like, yeah, there you go. You know, like, yes, life, universe, you know, it's getting there. That's what we're going for. You know, that's what we're going for. And so there's a sense of kind of recognition, marveling, encouragement, applauding, celebrating. So speaking of Saturn, we have reached our time limit. And just like Prince said, I don't know if it was Prince, parties aren't meant to last. I should look at his chart, where Saturn lands in his chart. It's a very Jupiter-Saturn thing. Maybe he's got Jupiter-Saturn in his chart. Jupiter, the party, the celebration, and Saturn, the true reality that all things come to an end. And so with that in mind, thank you all for being here in this and bringing your liveliness to the discussion tonight. It's been such a gift, such a joy. I really enjoyed it. I really had fun. I hope to see some of your faces in my course coming up. We're going to go deeper and have even more fun and more celebration and more insights. So thank you. And you'll be receiving an email from me with all the information for the course, with this recording, of course. And if you're watching the recording, thank you too. And you'll have all the information for the course somewhere in your proximity as well. Alexis says, excited for the course. Great. Thank you so much. Fundamentals of Archetypal Astrology as a Spiritual Practice. Hope to see you there. So glad to see you here. Cheers. Let's move forward. I look forward to crossing paths with all of you. Thank you so much. Bye now.